Okay, so I want to talk about the taboo subject, but the important subject of rape cases in criminal proceedings and how the media public respond to them. And I want to particularly focus on prominent defendants. There have been many notable cases of this happening. I'm going to start off by discussing a little bit, and I emphasize only a little bit because I honestly don't know all the details of the case. But discussing Ched Evans. He's a English footballer, and he was accused of raping a 19-year-old girl when she was intoxicated. Well, yesterday he was cleared of the charges, but his particular case has been going on for about 2.5 years. He was sacked from his club. I don't know which club he played for, but he was sacked from his club, and well, he had his name plastered all over the press as a rapist. Um, And a notable thing about his case was that, in terms of testimony, in terms of the defense, previous partners were brought in to testify that he hadn't been sexually aggressive with women. Um, as I understand it, there was also criticism, or there was criticism, of the way in which the girl who had. Actually, in this case, it's important to note she hadn't actually argued for, she hadn't pushed the rape claim, it was the police in this case that decided that's what had happened. Apparently, what she maintained was that she couldn't remember what had happened. Nevertheless, she would have went to the police in the first place. I think we have to be very, very careful in these cases because I think with rape cases, they're probably the hardest of all criminal cases to proceed. Because if you get other types of crime, say for example arson, the evidence is just right there, it's abundantly clear. In rape cases, you can get things like semen tests and so on, but other than that, I think it is one of the hardest things to process because it ultimately becomes his word against hers, or against theirs in some cases. And it's a double edged sword because a lot of it comes down to what your preconceived notion is. So, the thing about footballers in the UK is they do have a reputation for being party animals, being reckless, being promiscuous, and being arrogant. That is sort of the reputation that goes with footballers. They're sort of seen as these extravagant playboys who have too much money to know what to do with it. Now, there is certainly some truth in that stereotype, but that's the point. It is a stereotype. So when a lot of people read a headline, footballer accused of rape, a lot of people will automatically assume that is what has happened because of this reputation that footballers have. On the other hand, a lot of people will automatically defend him, and I hate to say it, a lot of guys will automatically defend him because maybe he's a player they particularly like, or maybe he's in a team that they like, etc. So there is also a culture of denial that rape happens. Let me just make one point, and this might be controversial, but I do think it's important to say. I have some difficulty with this idea if an alleged victim says that she can't remember the events. I have some difficulty with that, and that's not the same as blaming the victim. I'm just saying that if someone has been raped, now my rational thinking says that's a traumatic experience. Surely it's something that you would remember if a man took advantage of you. I mean, the caveat to that is if someone is so drunk out of their mind they can't remember, but it seems to me quite a big difference between that and a woman being attacked in a back alley, which is actually not the common form of rape. It's a stereotype of rape, but it's not the common context. I don't want to be misunderstood, by the way. That's not to justify it in any way. I think any man that takes advantage of a drunk woman is, I think that's a disgraceful thing to do. But I do have difficulty with not remembering being used as evidence because it isn't. Not remembering is not remembering. Um, the difficulty with rape trials is, firstly, Well, if I look back at the Jimmy Savile case, and it's not exactly the same, because that was more about paedophilia as opposed to raping women, but that's a prominent example in this country of a high-profile man. He was an entertainer, um, who basically for years his fame was his defense, and he was immune from justice for a very long time, and powerful figures in the British establishment, the BBC, including even the Prime Minister, basically bought into, or more seriously, were part of a covert operation to cover up his crimes. Now, the lesson from the Jimmy Savile case, he died 5 years ago, but the lesson from that is that we shouldn't assume that it is always a case of, for example, if a number of victims come forward. And this is happening right now with Donald Trump. And again, it comes down to, how do we really ascertain the truth? Critics of Trump are automatically going to believe he's a rapist. And hardcore Trump supporters are automatically going to say it's a stitch up. These women have been paid by the Clinton campaign and so on. I honestly don't know. I just don't know. But I do think it's plausible that a man with the money of Donald Trump and with the power of Donald Trump in the celebrity world could very easily intimidate potential accusers. So in that case, I mean, I admit at first I thought, well, why are they coming out now? But someone made the point that maybe it was hard for them to come out before, because, if it's an individual versus a multi-billionaire, probably has an army of lawyers, it's very difficult. Um, in the Chet Evans case, certainly some of the way he behaved that night doesn't exactly help him. Apparently, he had a threesome and one of the women was drunk. Now, that's not responsible, whatever way you look at it. Doesn't mean he's a rapist, but still not responsible behavior. It's also been pointed out that the testimony from ex-partners doesn't really mean a great deal, because they weren't in the room when it happened. I think we have to be careful not to assume that every woman that comes forward with rape allegations is a false accuser. And I think part of the problem is, because there has been cases of false accusers, that then tarnishes all women. And that's very unfair, because rape is an abhorrent crime. It has an impact on the victim for years afterwards. So I think there's too much of a tendency to assume that women aren't telling the truth. But by the same token, I have a real problem with the issues around anonymity. I think it's a disgrace that a defendant is named and the accuser isn't, or the person who's the alleged victim isn't. You either have it that both parties are named, or you have it that both parties aren't named. I understand the argument that if a defendant is named, it can encourage other women to come forward, but I still don't think that is enough of a reason to have any man who is accused of this appalling crime basically have his name dragged through the gutter, because even if he is found not guilty, his reputation's ruined forever. And we do know that in recent cases, the singer Cliff Richard was accused of terrible crimes. Well, it turned out that he was cleared of all charges. He's now in the process of suing the BBC for the way they reported that. And there is a problem with this, that now, because of Jimmy Savile, any older male celebrity who's accused of these things isn't really going to get the benefit of the doubt. So there's a real fine balancing line here between ascertaining the truth, because people are going to have a preconceived notion of what they believe to be the truth, and nobody should assume that they know. This has to be done in a court of law with as much evidence that is available, and that's all there is to it. Personally, I think we need to change two things. We need to bring in anonymity for defendants. That to me is absolute, because I don't accept that the argument, oh, well, if we name the defendant, it encourages women to come forward. I don't think those sort of cases are prominent enough to justify smearing every male defendant in every case. So I would introduce anonymity for defendants. Um, and if you have cases like, for example, a prominent politician has been accused, if people want to get involved in the guessing game, I still think that is less of a problem than someone who could potentially have their reputation completely tarnished. But the other thing that has to change is the attitude towards women victims, because far too often there is an assumption that they're just doing it for attention or something. It's quite an ordeal going through that, going to the police, going through court proceedings, and the vast majority of women wouldn't want to put themselves through it. So I think we also need to change our attitudes towards female victims and stop assuming that they're in it for something or they're lying. That's preposterous. And in cases where you have, let's say, 10 women accusing a man, it seems a bit far fetched that they're all being paid off by his political opponent. If it's true, it's appalling, but it does seem far fetched. Um, to have in those sort of cases, I'd be more tempted to believe the women because if it was one woman who had a reputation as a liar, then okay, there's cast for reasonable doubt. But more than one woman, then you start thinking, well, there must be something in this. But like I say, the only people that know is the man and the the alleged victims. That is it. That is it. Also, it has to be pointed out in some cases, for example, in the cases where a woman doesn't remember, it may be the case that she has been a victim of rape, but it may be that another man has been responsible. That's something else that also has to be considered. So this is very, very important. Rape is an appalling crime, and we should never lose sight of that. And we don't want to ever be in a situation, the incredibly regressive and backward attitude of the likes of Saudi Arabia, where rape victims are blamed. But by the same token, I think this issue of anonymity, um, and by the way, the fact that Ched Evans is wealthy and a celebrity is frankly irrelevant in terms of whether he's guilty or innocent. He could well be wealthy and a celebrity, doesn't mean he's guilty. But by the same token, that shouldn't, sort of put him on a pedestal above Joe Average. And I do think there's a bit of hypocrisy from male supporters of some of these guys because I'm not sure if they would show the same sympathy to a Joe Average who was accused of rape. Say if I was accused of rape, would people be rushing to say, "Oh, all these women are just trying to tarnish Nathan Hazlett"? I don't think so. Um, so really, people need to think very, very carefully about this. Too many people rush to judgment either way, and in the case of Donald Trump, well, he might well be guilty. Personally, given his previous statements, it doesn't cast him in a good light. It does display a bad attitude to women, and it does, to me, give quite strong indication that this is a man who's very capable of doing something like that. But that is just speculation, and these things have to be worked on with evidence. So let me know your thoughts. I've tried to be as balanced and open-minded as possible in this video, and the intention wasn't to offend anyone. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.